Good afternoon. So what I'm going to try to do is with this presentation, just kind of complement a little bit of what Nancy's already talked about, Director Keenan has spoke about, and Dawn, and just talk a little bit about how law enforcement can utilize social media from an investigative standpoint as well. So once you've got the resource or the research done, you went to IACP Center for Social Media, you've got all their good stuff that Nancy was talking about earlier and doing all the research. You went back to your department, you've developed a proper policy or a proper procedure for you to follow. Now it's time to take that next step and kind of jumping into how are we going to use it from a departmental standpoint, and how can it be beneficial to our department and to our community. All right? So that's what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about here and give you some different case examples as well as we move through this. So here's some big areas that how law enforcement, three areas where law enforcement can utilize social media from an intelligence gathering standpoint, as we've talked a little bit already about, from a public awareness standpoint of sending information out to the public and also collecting information from the public, and the crowdsourcing or tips and lead generators as to, and I think Nancy spoke about this earlier, about posting information out there for cold cases or for things that may have happened in your community, and law enforcement can then go back, or the citizens can then go back and review this and give them information and pass information back into law enforcement. One thing that I'll mention is as we kind of go through these and look at these specific areas, you know, it's common practice for many departments to use social media for monitoring, collecting, disseminating information to law enforcement officers and the public, and that's absolutely true. One thing you have to think about here is law enforcement has to go to where their community is. And right now their community is online. And that's very important that, you know, law enforcement understand that. And mainly departments, because if you go back, in a lot of the big departments, smaller departments nowadays too, are expecting law enforcement to have some type of a presence, to push information out to the public, or, you know, a place for the public to report information back in. And it's an expectation now. It's not something that is, you know, should we do this, should we not? Those are questions you're going to have to ask from your departmental standpoint, but a lot of folks in your communities, it is an expectation. It's something you have to think about. I'm not going to get into too much of the intelligence gathering restrictions. Dawn did a great job, Director Keenan did a great job of talking about the departmental policies and procedures and making sure you follow those and you have those. I think, you know, with the survey results, more and more departments understand the importance of having that policy put in place. And as we go forward with different case law, it's going to be extremely important that those policies are put in place and are followed. 28 CFR Part 23 also mentioned the federal guideline that kind of controls how we collect, disseminate, and store intelligence information as well. Very important from a state law enforcement standpoint, state and local standpoint. And before I kind of get into and just talk about some different case examples, I want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges as well. And resource and time constraints. Nancy talked a little bit about that earlier, about some of the different resources and time constraints that it takes to gather some of this information, depending on what you're using it for. And it's just not gathering the information, it's also who's going to update our social media website or our platform. Who's going to take the time to do that? Who's going to take the time to push information out? Who's going to take the time to be able to go in and you have an analyst on staff that will be able to collect this information? If you have an investigator that says, hey, you know what? Does this suspect that we have a social media presence? It's going to take some time, it's going to take some resources, but a lot of the information that you may get back will be very valuable to your case and can be very, very valuable to your case. The volume of information, as you can kind of see here, and you may have heard this analogy in the past, getting information off the internet or social media is like taking a drink from a fire hydrant. It's huge. There's so much information out there. To think that law enforcement is just going to sit there and look at every tweet or every Facebook post, that's an impossibility to do. It really is. The vast amount of information that is out there, we have to have a reason to be able to look for it. And look at that information and see where it's going to provide value to the investigation. There are so many different rants and raves and things on social media that we just can't follow every single one. And it's important to understand that. Education, understanding how the social media works. In my opinion, one of the most important challenges that law enforcement has is to stay up with how Facebook's privacy policies. We need to understand that. And we need to understand if we have an individual create an undercover account, or we have a public page using one of these platforms from a departmental standpoint, we have to understand these policies. IACP Center for Social Media is excellent about providing that information and making sure you understand how to use it. Because the last thing you want to do is create this profile or create this account and not understand how its privacy settings work on this and jeopardize your investigation or jeopardize your department. So it's very important that you understand before you just go right into it, understanding the privacy policies and how these social media platforms are set up. Another thing that sometimes is often missed when conducting and looking at social media, information found on social media, is the validity and reliability of that information. It's always something you have to think about. And so it's user-generated content. That's what it is. It's user-generated content. And so you have to have an understanding that just because they post this on their Twitter account, or they post this on Instagram, or they post this on Facebook, it's very important for law enforcement to also think back and say, you know what, maybe I should try to vet this information somewhere else too. And so that's always things that you kind of have to think about. And those are some of the different challenges that we run into from a law enforcement perspective as to gathering this information, or looking at this information, and putting it to use. So I just wanted to kind of talk about some of those challenges right off the bat first, before we kind of get into some different case examples that are put in place.